Jimmy was making jokes. The audience was laughing. Then Jesse Eisenberg started reading that letter, and the entire studio went silent because the words inside changed everything. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Studio 6A at Rockefeller Center. Another Thursday night. Another packed audience. Another celebrity guest promoting another movie. The familiar rhythm of late-night television, banter, games, laughter, musical performances. Jesse Eisenberg sat in the guest chair, promoting his latest indie film. He'd been on the show before. The interview was going well. Jimmy was in peak form, cracking jokes, doing impressions, getting big laughs. Jesse was doing his trademark nervous intellectual thing, talking quickly, gesturing with his hands, making self-deprecating comments that landed perfectly. Everything was exactly what late-night television should be. Light. Fun. Entertaining. Until the envelope appeared. A production assistant walked onto the stage, unusual during a live interview, but not unheard of. She handed Jimmy a small manila envelope, whispered something in his ear, and quickly retreated off camera. Jimmy looked at the envelope, confused. He glanced at his producer in the wings, who nodded. Jimmy's expression shifted slightly, still professional, but now curious. "Jesse," Jimmy said, holding up the envelope. "Our producers just handed me something and told me it's for you. They said it's a letter? From someone who wanted to make sure you got it tonight." Jesse's casual demeanor vanished. His hands, which had been gesturing animatedly, dropped to his lap. "A letter? For me? Here?" "That's what they said." Jimmy extended the envelope across the desk. "Do you want to open it?" Jesse took it with trembling fingers. The audience, sensing something unusual, went quiet. This wasn't part of the planned segment. This was real. Jesse opened the envelope slowly and pulled out a single piece of paper, old, worn at the edges, covered in careful handwriting. His eyes scanned the first line, and his entire face crumpled. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. Jesse's hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled audibly in the studio's sudden silence. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. Tears began streaming down his face. Not the single tear of a touching moment, but full, body-shaking sobs that he tried desperately to control. Jimmy's smile evaporated. He stood up from behind his desk, something he almost never did during interviews, and walked around to Jesse's side. The cameras scrambled to adjust. The Roots stopped their usual subtle background music. 300 audience members sat forward in their seats, the laughter of moments ago completely forgotten. "Jesse?" Jimmy's voice was soft, concerned, all traces of his host persona gone. "Hey man, what's going on? Are you okay?" Jesse couldn't answer. He held the letter to his chest, bent forward in the guest chair, and wept. Not performed emotion. Real, uncontrolled grief. Jimmy crouched beside the guest chair, one hand on Jesse's shoulder. He looked at the cameras, then at his producer off stage. Can we take a minute here?" The producer nodded, making a rolling gesture with his hand. "Keep going, keep filming, this is real." Jimmy turned back to Jesse, who was trying to catch his breath, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Talk to me," Jimmy said quietly. "What's in the letter?" Jesse took several shaky breaths. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but the studio microphones caught every word. "It's from my acting teacher," he said. "My first acting teacher. From when I was 16. He died last month. I didn't know. I'd lost touch with him years ago, and I didn't know." The audience made a collective sound of sympathy. Jimmy's hand stayed on Jesse's shoulder. "His wife must have sent this," Jesse continued, looking at the envelope still in his other hand. "She must have known I was going to be on tonight. The letter it's from 23 years ago. He wrote it right after my first real audition. The one where I got my first role. But he never gave it to me. He kept it all these years." "What does it say?" Jimmy asked gently. Jesse looked at the letter again, his eyes filling with fresh tears. Do you want me to read it? Jimmy looked at the audience, who were all nodding, then back at Jesse. Only if you want to, man. No pressure. Jesse nodded slowly. He unfolded the letter with shaking hands, took a breath, and began to read aloud. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Martin Greenfield was, and what he meant to a 16-year-old kid who thought he might want to be an actor. Jesse Eisenberg grew up in Queens, New York. Middle-class family. Smart kid. Anxious kid. The kind of teenager who read constantly, wrote stories, felt everything too deeply, and wasn't quite sure where he fit in the world. When he was 15, his mother suggested he try an acting class. Not because he'd expressed interest in acting, he hadn't, really, but because she thought it might help with his anxiety, give him a structured outlet for all the nervous energy he carried around. The class was held in a small studio above a grocery store in Astoria. 8 teenagers sitting in a circle on folding chairs. The teacher was Martin Greenfield, a 62-year-old former Broadway actor who'd spent the last 20 years teaching kids like Jesse how to access their emotions, tell truth on stage, and maybe, if they were lucky and worked hard, make a career out of it. Martin was tough. He didn't believe in coddling. He pushed his students relentlessly, demanding honesty, vulnerability, commitment. Half the kids who started his classes quit within a month. It was too hard. Too exposing. Too real. But Jesse stayed. Not because he thought he was good, he was convinced he was terrible, but because something about the work felt right. When he was in that studio, pretending to be someone else, he could let go of all the anxiety that normally paralyzed him. He could just be. Martin saw something in Jesse that Jesse didn't see in himself. After class one night, about 3 months in, Martin pulled him aside. You're different from the others, Martin said. You think you're hiding, but you're actually revealing. That's rare. That's real talent. Jesse, 16 and insecure, didn't believe him. I'm just doing the exercises. No, Martin insisted. You're living them. There's a difference. And if you keep working this hard, if you don't let fear stop you, you're going to do this professionally. I'm sure of it. It was the first time anyone had told Jesse he could be an actor. Really be one. Not as a hobby or a way to manage anxiety, but as a career. A life. 6 months later, Martin helped Jesse prepare for his first professional audition. A small role in an off-Broadway play. Nothing glamorous. 3 lines and 2 weeks of rehearsal. But it was real. It was paid. It was the beginning. Jesse got the role. He was 17. He called Martin immediately, screaming into the phone about the callback, the offer, the contract. Martin listened to every word, proud and unsurprised. I knew you could do it, Martin said. This is just the start, Jesse. Just the beginning. After that, Jesse's career took off faster than anyone expected. More plays. Then television. Then films. Within 5 years, he was starring in movies, getting award nominations, working with directors he'd idolized. His life became a whirlwind of sets and press tours and premieres. And gradually, inevitably, he lost touch with Martin Greenfield. Not intentionally. Not maliciously. Just the way it happens when your life accelerates beyond recognition. Occasional emails became rare, phone calls became nothing at all. Jesse thought about Martin sometimes. Meant to reach out. Always planned to visit the old studio in Astoria, surprise him, thank him properly. But years passed and he never did. The guilt of that silence became its own barrier. How do you reconnect after so much time? How do you explain the absence? 3 weeks ago, Martin Greenfield died of a heart attack at 85 years old. Jesse didn't find out until after the funeral. A mutual acquaintance mentioned it casually at a party. Did you hear about Martin Greenfield? Such a shame. His wife said he talked about you all the time, you know. Really proud of what you became. Jesse had gone home that night and cried for hours. For the teacher he'd lost. For the thank you he'd never given. For the connection he'd let slip away. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Now, sitting in Jimmy Fallon's guest chair with cameras rolling and 300 people watching, Jesse held the letter Martin Greenfield had written 23 years ago and never sent. Dear Jesse. Jesse read, his voice shaking but determined to get through it. You called me today to tell me you got the part. I could hear in your voice that you didn't quite believe it was real. That you thought maybe they made a mistake choosing you. I need you to know something, and I'm writing it down so you can't argue with me the way you always do in class. The audience laughed softly, a gentle, understanding laugh. Jesse smiled through his tears and continued. You are going to be a great actor. Not because you're perfect. Not because you don't have doubts. But because you have the rarest gift an actor can have, you tell the truth even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. You don't hide behind technique or charm. You just show up. Fully. Honestly. Vulnerably. And that's what great acting is. Jesse's voice broke. He paused, wiping his eyes, then forced himself to continue. I'm writing this letter because I know how your brain works. I know you're going to succeed, and I know you're going to doubt every step of it. You're going to think you're fooling people. You're going to think you don't deserve it. You're going to compare yourself to everyone else and always come up short in your own mind. So I'm writing this down, and I'm keeping it, and someday when you need to hear this, I'll give it to you. You were always meant to do this. You were always good enough. And I always believed in you, even, especially, when you didn't believe in yourself. The studio was completely silent except for Jesse's voice and the occasional sniff from audience members wiping their own eyes. Jimmy had tears streaming down his face. Questlove had his head down, drumsticks forgotten in his lap. Jesse read the final lines. I'm so proud of you, Jesse. Not because you got this part, but because you had the courage to try. That's the hardest part, the trying. Everything else is just work. Keep trying. Keep showing up. Keep telling the truth. And remember that somewhere in Astoria, in a studio above a grocery store, there's a grumpy old acting teacher who knows you're going to change the world. All my love and belief, Martin. Jesse folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest. He looked at Jimmy, who was still crouched beside the guest chair. I never got to thank him. Jesse whispered. I meant to. I always meant to. And now. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Jimmy stood up slowly. He looked at the audience, then at the cameras, then back at Jesse. When he spoke, his voice was clear and certain. Jesse, I need you to do something for me. For him. Can you do that? Jesse nodded, confused. Jimmy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a blue note card, one of the cards he used for his monologue, covered in his own handwriting with jokes and bits. He looked at it for a moment, then at Jesse. This is how I remember my jokes. Every night, I write them down on these cards. And at the end of every show, I throw them away. Start fresh the next night. He held the card out to Jesse. But I want you to keep this one. I want you to write something on the back of it. Whatever you wish you could have said to Martin. And then I want you to keep it with his letter. So you'll always have both, what he said to you, and what you would have said to him. Jesse took the blue card with trembling hands. He pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote for 30 seconds while the studio watched in absolute silence. When he finished, he folded the card and tucked it into the envelope with Martin's letter. Thank you, Jesse whispered to Jimmy. Jimmy put his arm around Jesse's shoulders. He knew. Teachers always know. That's why he kept the letter all these years. He was waiting for the right moment to remind you. The audience rose as one. Standing ovation. Not for the movie Jesse came to promote. For the moment they just witnessed. For grief honored. For connection preserved. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Jesse had Martin's letter professionally framed alongside Jimmy's blue note card. They hang in his home office. On the card, he'd written, "I'm still trying. I'm still showing up. Thank you for teaching me how." Jesse now teaches acting workshops twice a year. Free. For anxious teenagers who aren't sure they belong. He starts every class the same way. "Someone once believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Now I'm passing that forward." Martin's legacy didn't end with his death. It multiplied.